Welcome, everybody. My name is Savannah Bretthauer, as a lot of you know, and on behalf of Dr. Sasha Thomason, the Animal Facilities Inspector Program for the Kansas Department of Agriculture, I want to welcome you to today's webinar. I serve as the AFI Inspection Investigator, and I appreciate you guys taking the time for this webinar that's focused on enrichment and behavior modification. For the next 60 minutes, and it'll probably be the whole 60 minutes, we will be focused on the difference between enrichment and behavior modifications and how to get started if you don't have anything in place or you have limited funding. Enrichment and behavior modification is important to KDA licensee holders because not only do you guys care about the physical well-being of your animals, but the mental well-being is just as vital. Enrichment gives animals the opportunity to feel like they have a sense of control in their environment and can significantly help reduce stress and increase positive social skills. This is important not only in a shelter environment, but in a breeding kennel and pet store environment as well. All animals can benefit from enrichment. Behavior modification has come a long way on the training side of animal care, and knowing how to positively approach unwanted behaviors with animals can really help out licensees with stress and increase productivity in their facilities. A couple of housekeeping items before the session begins. During the presentation portion of this session, all participants' microphones will be muted by the meeting host. If you have any questions during the presentations, please submit them using your question or using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. The KDA staff, myself, and Daniel will be monitoring the chat for any questions, and they can be asked at the conclusion of the presentation. Lastly, this session is being recorded and it will be posted online next week if for some reason you guys have to hop off early. I'd like to introduce you guys to Tim Yeaglin. Tim is with the Best Friends Animal Society. 35 years ago, a group of people made a leap of faith to realize a vision that they had long shared to create a sanctuary for abandoned and abused animals. This was the logical extension of a rescue and advocacy work that they've been doing for years. Little did they appreciate that their endeavor would catapult them into the forefront of a fledgling movement to end the killing of 17 million dogs and cats who were dying in our nation's shelters annually at the time. With little money, no master plan, and few construction skills, and countless lives hanging in the balance, they set out to address a local aspect of a much larger problem. What they created instead was the largest no-kill animal sanctuary in the world and a national movement to end the killing of companion animals. Born in Illinois, Tim found himself living in Indiana and Iowa before permanently settling down here in Kansas. Tim's decade-long journey into animal welfare began by volunteering his master photography skills to take pictures of adoptable cats and dogs at various Kansas City animal shelters. His love for shelters and their work led him to take a marketing position at a local shelter. He became the director of operations at the fledgling shelter and helped restructure it one department at a time. Tim is particularly good at teaching shelter dogs household manners for their adoptive homes. He's passionate about reducing the fear, anxiety, and stress of all animals and loves to strengthen the human-animal bond. Tim, I will now turn it over to you if you want to share your presentation with us.
Awesome. I appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. I see some familiar faces in the group here today. So this is something that I am definitely passionate about. This is where I've gone down the most kind of educational wormhole of dealing with all this stuff. And we'll get started. This probably will run the presentation. I do have some videos and things like that at the end that'll probably take us right up to the 60-minute mark. But I will stick around if you guys need to bop out, that's fine. But we can answer questions kind of at the end. So I'll stick around until all the questions are answered. But basically where we start is enrichment versus behavior programs. So when we talk about behavior programs, we're talking about enrichment and behavior modification, right? So behavior modification or BMOD, changes in existing behavior that would possibly make an animal a little bit more difficult to find a home. So things like reactivity, guarding, and that sort of stuff. Enrichment programs engage the minds of the animals in order to keep the stress and frustrations low so we don't develop behaviors that make it more difficult later on to find homes. So one is kind of, if we can get proactive versus reactive is kind of where we're at with those two programs. So the question is, which one do you choose? So most shelters don't actually need a behavior program, but what they need is a robust enrichment program and policies and procedures that are in place so that we can track changes of behavior and then meet the needs of the animals so that we don't actually get to the point where we're getting behaviors that we have to modify. So if we really take on a proactive approach, that is what we should really focus all of our attention on. So foster-based rescues will have will have a greater success implementing BMOD, just because that is where trainers are most comfortable, is doing one-on-one in-home training. So it's going to be more conducive to doing more of the BMOD stuff than, say, working in a shelter. When we're talking about doing shelter work, it's going to be more of what we can do. What's the most amount of work that we can do in the shortest amount of time possible? And can we then create a group environment where we can get a lot of behaviors done with a lot of animals at the same time? So things such as like playgroup, pack walks, that sort of stuff we can implement. And so we're actually impacting a greater number of animals in the shortest amount of time possible, since resources are always scarce in the shelter environment. So a behavior team requires an understanding of classical and operant conditioning, body language, learning theory. These are all highly skilled employees that require additional training. So this is something that takes a lot of education time, a lot of book reading, a lot of theory, a lot of practice in like actual taking what we learn in the books and then putting into practice, shadowing with trainers, that sort of stuff, going through like a Karen Pryor Academy program where then you have to record yourself doing the work before you can get your certification, that type of stuff. Enrichment programs, you really just need a pretty good understanding of body language, and it helps to understand learning theory, but of course that's not necessarily required. So we're really looking at the psychology of the animal, and the body language is going to tell us whether or not we're meeting the needs of that animal or not. So there's a fair amount of crossover between the two. Programs as let's say like playgroup is a kind of the perfect tool to do both, right? So we can use it as an enrichment tool and that's its primary function, but you can actually use it as a behavior modification tool as well. So the like doing playgroups and things like that, it does require a fair amount of resources. Both of these require a fair amount of resources. But the implementing them far outweighs what the costs are going to be. And it's just sometimes some of this stuff is a shift in mindset of just having it. If behavior is something that's very important to your organization, then everybody should have a treat pouch on them. Everybody should have a clicker on them. Like that should be like that shows that this is something that's very important to us, and that's something that we take very seriously. So that when we see rewardable behavior, we can go ahead, anybody in the shelter can reward that behavior. So it's just even just changing the culture that this is what we're going to do from now on is something that we can do that doesn't really cost that much any extra money, but it's just a change in the thinking of how we deal with these animals in our care. So enrichment falls into two buckets. We basically have social enrichment and environmental enrichment. So social enrichment is going to allow dogs and cats to spend time with each other and humans. So the latest research shows that each animal should have a minimum of 15 minutes of human contact a day. Obviously, the more time they spend out of the kennel, the better off they will be mentally. Environmental enrichment is enriching the space within which the animal is being held. So that's having like toys, feeding, furniture, sensory enrichment, and I'll go into that stuff in more detail. But environmental enrichment we think of as the kennel, like we just throw peanut butter Kong in the kennel, but that's actually every environment that they're in. When we go out on a walk, are we creating enrichment opportunities along the path that we walk? So if we have a trail, can we set out different sensory enrichment items that would enrich that experience while they're on the walk? If we have dogs that are staying in offices so they can get some time out of their kennel, are we enriching the office so that they can have a better sensory experience in that? If they're hanging out behind the adoption counter, even if they're in a temporary foster home or a sleepover or a dog day out, what are we doing to their sensory uh, uh, basically, how are we enriching their minds during those times? We think that, oh, the car ride is the experience. Be like, yeah, it partially is, but what can we do to do that more? Can we stop by Starbucks and get a pup cup for the dog? Now we've introduced taste and that sort of stuff to the sensory environment that would be like I'm able to sniff outside and do those things along a car ride. So we started thinking beyond just we're just going to do a car ride. What can we do additionally to enrich that process? So here's a picture of a typical kennel. So ideally, the kennel is used for the dogs and cats to settle. That's ultimately what we want them to do. So adult dogs need 14 hours of sleep. Puppies need about 18 hours of sleep. Adult cats need 15 or so hours of sleep, and then kittens need like 18 to 20 hours of sleep. Right? That's the latest research indicates that sleep deprivation can lead to aggressive behaviors, which honestly is that really a surprise because when we think of how moody we get when we don't get a good night's sleep, imagine taking whatever your average length of stay is and imagine yourself in an environment where you don't get, say, like 40 nights of good sleep, and then wonder why this animal is behaving in the way that it's behaving, right? So in this photo we have here, there's buckets. You see the buckets on the kennel doors. So this is a thing that you can do for enrichment as well as behavior modification, like click for quiet, which I have a video on that later. But instead of like barking when somebody comes by, if they're calm and four on the floor, we can click and reward that behavior. And then magically over time, the animals stop barking whenever we come by and they're actually calm, right? That's what the rewardable behavior is. It's only going to work if we actually have their frustration low and we're doing drive expression and we're meeting the needs of that animal. But we can do that to then now when adopters come in, the kennels are all quiet, the dogs are all calm. We can actually shorten the length of stay by doing something as simple as click for quiet and get these animals that are actually being seen as calm house animals, like house pets, instead of just crazy street dogs, which is what people's perception is from the surveys that we have done for kind of what the public feels shelters have in the populations that they have. It's not great. And there's certain advertising that's out there that doesn't necessarily paint shelter animals in the best light. So there's enrichment items that you can put in there, like tethered toys. So if you have a dog that really likes pulling, you can get, I've seen like garage springs kind of hooked onto a kennel with a tether, and then they can sit there and basically they can sit there and play tug with themselves, and things like that. These are obviously things we don't want to have up all the time. These are things that we can do. One of the things that we used to do was we had a 2x4 because we had basically like the shoreline kennels, do a 2x4 across that had a bolt in it with a cable, and basically kind of like it had a dealy bob in the Kong itself, in the top of the Kong, where we could screw a peanut butter Kong to the cable, and then we could adjust the cable so it was just barely in reach of the dog. So they would lick the peanut butter, and as they would go, the thing would swing, and so they're running around the kennel trying to get this peanut butter Kong. But eventually, they would spin it enough where it would unscrew, and then they would have the reward of the peanut butter Kong. So just enriching that experience, their mind is being taken off of whatever's happening in the shelter. And then, of course, when we're done with it, we take it all away. So we don't have to worry about, damage to the dog biting on a cable or anything like that. These are all temporary things that we can do to enrich their space and give them a little bit of expression. So stress is the #1 enemy. Stress is our biggest enemy within a shelter environment. So the goal of any enrichment program is to reduce stress and frustration in the shelter. So frustration leads to stress. So if we are not meeting the needs of the dog or the cat, we get frustration. Frustration leads to stress. Stress leads to chronic stress. And then chronic stress increases the cortisol levels, which lowers the immune response. And thus we now have the ability to now have kennel cough, upper respiratory infections start to spread through the shelter. So when we see length of stay increase, we also see our disease outbreak increase. Surprise, surprise, right? Cortisol levels suppress the immune response and makes them more susceptible to disease in the shelters. So Fear Free Shelters is a free resource. If you guys aren't doing it already, it's a great resource to do all your volunteers and an onboarding thing for the staff, which helps give you tools to lower and recognize what fear, anxiety, and stress is. So the easiest way to reduce stress is to have a low length of stay. If they're only there for 10 days, cool. Like there's no stress. But you guys aren't on this call because you have a length of stay of 10 days. So if we're looking at resources, how much resources are we putting towards getting animals out? How are we getting animals returned to owners? Like if you're find out what your return to owner rate, if it's 20%, how do we increase that to 50%? How much resource are we going to need to put towards like a return to owner program so that these animals aren't in our care? Like we need to alleviate some of the pressure and things like that. Like what can we do to start marketing stuff? Facebook is not going to cut it. Like do we have volunteers put Adopt Me vest on these dogs and then walk them down Main Street? Are we doing stuff working with local um like mom and pop shops and things like that, where it's like, oh, if you bring us a receipt from your store, you get a discount on an adoption, and then they actually post in their windows and things like that adoptable animals, or especially like a Lonely Hearts Club, some of the longer termer dogs and things like that. Are we doing that type of stuff, like out of the box thinking rather than waiting for people to come to us? We have to actively go out and seek the homes so that we can reduce the stress, get them out, right? So while they're in your care, you need to be focused on reducing stress. So limiting, one of the things that worked really great for COVID was we stopped having people walk through the kennels, and instead we have programs where we bring dogs up and things like that. So we can have a calmer environment instead of having just 200 people walking through the shelter on a given day. We only have the staff that the animals wind up getting to know, and then we can pull them out, which makes for a lot less stress in the environment. Playing classical music has been shown. So like through the dog's ear, through the cat's ear, those have been scientifically created to help alleviate stress. The tempo is always mimics a resting heart rate of both dogs and cats. Since those are different, they have two different classical musics that are played. We just have to make sure it's below 80 decibels, because anything above 80 decibels is now increasing stress. Even though it's classical music, we can actually increase it if we crank it really loud. That should be used in high arousal times of the day. So like midday, if we're cleaning, feeding, that type of stuff, we're going to be doing it during times like if we're pulling dogs for playgroup, we definitely want to be doing that. Doing physical or pheromone therapy, such as like Adaptil and Feel Away, works really good. Putting up temporary barriers for reactive dogs. I'm not a big fan of having permanent barriers, because now we are just making things a lot worse. They still need to be able to see, but to say if we're pulling dogs for playgroup and we're walking in front of this one dog's kennel who's getting a little bit barrier reactive, can we put up a blanket, clip it on there for the hour that we're pulling dogs, and then it comes down when we're not pulling dogs? So Feel Away and Zylkene. Zylkene is Zylkene. It's an over-the-counter. Think of it like a kind of like a holistic gabapentin that works incredibly well in cats. Adaptil and Zylkene work moderately effective in dogs, but for cats, it is fantastic. Feel Away works great in reducing stress in cats. So kind of where to start? Well, there's a lot of stuff. And you're going to look at this and be like, we don't have space for any of this stuff. We don't have time for any of this stuff. I get it. I'm going to go through all of this, and then you guys can pick and choose what you think would work for your organization. So enrichment isn't a one size fits all program. It's designed to be tailor-made to fit an individual animal's needs. So one, we need to recognize the need of the animal, recognize if it's getting frustrated, and then we need to change whatever program that we're doing. So doing daily rounds will help determine whether or not the current path is appropriate for that animal. So when we're talking pathway planning, we're like, the pathway is adoption, but now all of a sudden we start to see behaviors that are like, oh, this dog is starting to redirect onto the handler when we're putting the dog back. Well, that's severe frustration. The dog doesn't want to be in its kennel. So what do we need to do to help this animal do whatever it needs, right? We need to find out what that need is. So there's a lot of stuff. So sensory enrichment is pretty easy, right? That involves all of the senses. So taste is obviously food. We can do food puzzles. You guys see the cheap stuff where, there's a ton of stuff that's out on the internet where you take like the muffin tin and have tennis balls and put treats under there where they have to remove the tennis balls to get to the treats, or they just grab the whole muffin tin and throw it over and the treats fall on the floor. That's what my dog always used to do. Having frozen treats where they have to really work at it, frozen peanut butter kongs and things like it, where they have to really lick and lick and lick and lick, and it takes a lot longer than just consuming, say, like hot dogs or treats or something like that. So for sight, we have things like flirt poles, which is what this guy in the lower right-hand corner has. If you're not familiar with a flirt pole, it's like a cat wand, but it's large for dogs. And usually at the end is some sort of a fleece toy and things like that. Um, these are things that we can do to kind of activate like predatory motor response. And so we're kind of activating their prey drive and be like, oh, so that gives them a drive expression if they have, if they're say a terrier and they like to go after small prey, we can mimic small prey so they can get that drive out of them and then meet that need of that specific dog. So touch is one. We can do environmental touch. We can make an obstacle course where they have to step over obstacles, go under obstacles, go through obstacles. So agility training has a lot of that stuff, like weave poles. They usually have the weave poles real tight, so then they're actually touching the weave poles as they go through when they're going through tunnels, that sort of stuff. But you can create your own out of logs. If you just have some random fallen trees, you can create your own course where dogs can go up and over, and you can build your own course kind of with whatever you have on hand. It doesn't have to be something that you have to purchase. Doing gentle massage as benefits and also adds positive associations for handling as well as grooming. So just having them do belly rubs, doing kind of that massage all the way around the dog is great. The smell, AKC has a great scent work program. Like they have a sport that they have that's modeled after like bomb sniffing dogs. So then you can enrich any environment with scent by using this. They use different essential oils. I think there's 5 different essential oils, but it's really low scent. So it's like cypress is I think the first one that they kind of teach. And you basically train the dog to hit on the cypress scent, and then you can hide those fake bombs under boxes or underneath bushes and things like that. And then they basically go out searching and things like that. So it's really engaging the mind, really getting their nose involved. And that works with all dogs. We don't just have to worry about, dogs that are going to be typically used for those types of jobs. You can have a Chihuahua be trained in doing the scent work. Just understand that a dog's nose is 100 times more sensitive than ours. So if it's a strong smell for us, then it's going to definitely be way too much for them. So sound, we talked about the classical music, having a tempo of like 50 to 60 beats per minute has been shown to be relaxing. Actually, there's research out there now that shows that actually books on tape has been shown to have a more relaxing effect than classical music. So just hearing a human's voice. So just, if go to a library book sale, and then a lot of times they have books on tape for $1. Just drop them into a CD player if those still exist anymore, and then you can play them, and then just have books on tape. NPR is usually a pretty good station to listen to. It's boring people talking, and in between shows they play classical music, so that works pretty good too. Just make sure that at night there's no sound. We're not going to play classical music at night. Nighttime is for sleeping. We also don't want to have night lights and that sort of stuff. I've been to some shelters where they had night lights in the cat areas. And like, why are you doing this? Like their night vision is very, very good. You don't need light in there. And plus it can throw off their circadian rhythm so that they're not actually getting to sleep. And so that's we want it dark and we want it quiet at night so that they can actually get restful sleep. So physical enrichment is like walking and exploring the environment. So using long lines to allow the dogs to explore, like on walks and that sort of thing. Having dig pits, raised bed, logs, ramps, water, those are all things that they can do to explore. And so there's Dubuque Animal Shelter in Iowa has a wonderful trail that they have created around their shelter property, and they have created different kind of drive expression stations. So they have a sand pit where you can hide toys in there for the dogs that like to dig. For the dogs that like to pull on a tug, they have a suspended tug from a tree on a spring that they can go and they can tug on that as well. And so there's different things that you can do to create, given the space that you have either within the shelter or outside of the shelter using the property. I know some of the shelters are going to be landlocked in kind of metropolitan areas, but in my experience, they're usually out by the dump, right? So you usually have a lot more opportunity to create little enrichment trails and that sort of stuff that we can utilize. So doing training games, so it would be like basically impulse control stuff. So we can get them to sit and wait before we throw the ball, right? And then we can extend that time out. So you're going to wait for half a second and then I'm going to release you. And then you wait for a second and then I release you. And it's just showing some of that impulse control is laying the groundwork for actual doing obedience training and that type of stuff. Dog day outs, car rides, hikes, sleepovers, just changes of environment has been shown. There was good. Maddie's had a pretty good call a few weeks ago on cortisol levels. They had fitness trackers on dogs, and then they tested a lot of urine, but to track the cortisol levels to get a baseline of what the stress level was like at the shelter. Then they did a 1-night stay, so a sleepover for 1 night, tested the cortisol levels, and then went back to the shelter. And basically what they found was cortisol levels dropped. So it went from whatever the 50 parts per million or whatever the cortisol level was down to 30, and then went back up to 50 when they returned to the shelter. So they just went back to the baseline, because that's always the fear is like, well, if they get out for a day, when they come back, are they going to be more stressed? We have the current research that says, no, that's not the case. It is good to get them out, even if it's for 24 to 48 hours, so they can get a good night's sleep. So if you don't have programs like that, having programs where they can just get out for a little bit, it can help cause a reset if we're really starting to see some of these behaviors start to develop, and they'll just sleep for like 48 hours and then they come back to the shelter. So dog sports, this is one that takes a little bit more space, but if we have a play yard where we can put some of this stuff into and then we can take it out, that works really good. Some of this stuff you're going to have to YouTube to believe, but it's really cool. So agility, we're probably the most familiar with. A-frames, the walks, the tunnels, the weave poles, that type of stuff. Advanced obedience, like Schutzhund training, is something that you can do. That is just like, you have to, when we go on a walk, your head has to be next to my knee, kind of a thing. And that's more kind of advanced obedience. Tri-ball is really cool. If you haven't seen this, you should definitely YouTube it, because it's like soccer for herding dogs. So there's actually goals, there's big balls. They have to herd the balls into the goals. It's amazing. And things like that. So you could do like a little beach ball, you could create a little soccer goal, and then the dog has to push it in there and we reward it when it does all that stuff, right? So rally obedience is another AKC sport where there is a path, and then there's a sign, and the dog has to perform that task at that station. So think of it like if we have those trails in your city where you have to do like a pull up and then you walk 10 feet and then you have to do a sit up, and it's kind of those things, but it's more towards like obedience. Freestyle are those hilarious dance videos that you definitely need to check out on YouTube if you don't know these crazy people doing dance routines with their dogs. But it also helps increase human animal bond and starts to lay the groundwork for training. So lure courses are pretty cool. There's a motor that has a cable, and then you basically put out pulleys, and there is a white cloth that flings around a course very, very quickly, and it activates those sight hounds to basically have to chase that white fabric around, and it helps give the drive expression. So we have a lot of options here to pick and choose from, right? So we need to find the right balance. And then look at like, what does the dog do when you're finished? Are they settled and relaxed, which is what we're hoping for? Are they energized and frantic? Then that means either we didn't choose the right thing, or we didn't do it long enough. So those are two things to be like, we're really looking for. What you're looking for is that when we get done doing enrichment, are they actually settled and relaxed? That is our goal. And if we don't have that, then we may think that they have a specific drive that doesn't fit with what their expression needs to be. So then we need to pivot and then change what one of the things that we're doing is going to be so that they can have proper drive expression. So something that doesn't cost any money that you can actually do is start to add basic obedience to a walk. So we can do a kennel door routine, which I have a video of that. But when they come out of the kennel, when they pause at doors, they have to pause, sit, and then look at us, and then they're released through the door. So we call that threshold training. Anytime they come to a threshold, I did that all the time, because ultimately what I wanted the dogs to recognize was when you come to a door, you should pause and not run through it. And that would help with the door darters. So the dogs that are the repeat offenders that we just keep getting over and over again because they see an open door and they run out of it. Well, now when you come to a door, you need to pause. So that helps alleviate some of the strays that come through. So that's kind of, I always saw it as like that was for me, not necessarily for anybody else, because I didn't want them to have to bust through doors. So encourage eye contact. For me, eye contact's the #1 rewardable act. If you're looking at me, you're not doing anything stupid. right? So if you're making eye contact with me, you're not chasing the squirrel, you're not barking at the dog, you're not doing any of that stuff. So work on sitting with the 3Ds, which is distance, duration, and distraction. So sit, I step back 2 feet, cool, you're good. I step back 10 feet, 20 feet, and you remain sitting. The duration is obviously time. You're going to sit for 2 seconds and then I reward you, and then you sit for 30 seconds and I reward you. And distraction is you do all this stuff outside. Like there's plenty of distractions going on outside. There's going to be dogs, there's going to be people. You need to be able to listen to me when there's distraction. And those sorts of things you can do just on a general walk. You can just walk and then stop, make them sit, eye contact, and then we continue walking again. Those are just simple things that you can do that doesn't cost any money, that basically starts laying the foundation for doing more training after that. So let's talk about the kitties. There's a lot of dog stuff, but basically the cat's behavior, what they need to do on a daily basis, and this is if you've read any of Jackson Galaxy's book, this is hunt, catch, kill, eat, groom, sleep. It makes you memorize it. Hunt, catch, kill, eat, groom, sleep. So a common mistake that I see that shelters do is they treat cats as if they're small dogs. They are in fact not small dogs. We cannot use the same approach that we do on dogs to cats. They are a different species. They have different needs. And we have to treat them as if they are completely different. So enrichment for cats needs to encompass these elements of hunt, catch, kill, eat, groom, sleep, right? So if you are using lasers to enrich your cats, you can actually be causing more frustration. You can hunt a laser, you cannot catch and you cannot kill a laser. So we can use a laser to activate the prey drive to start to get them to stalk, but ultimately at the end of the day, we need to introduce a wand toy. The wand toy, in anybody who's played with a cat with a wand, I see a couple mistakes. One, they fling it back and forth so high that the cat can't reach it, and then they get frustrated and then they stop playing, right? So we need to do it slow enough and engage them to where they're going to activate their prey drive to where they're going to grab it, and then you're going to see them bite it, right? So that's hunt, catch, kill. So that's done. So we're going to do this enough and the cat's going to tell you when it's done. Cool. We can go then, put them back, and then I do happen to have the churro, right? These are just like little pate strips. It's like a Go-Gurt for cats. So then we can add a little bit of this. We get done with a little bit of an enrichment session, a little training session if we're even doing clicker training, and then we can reward them with a few licks off of the churro, right? And then what you're going to find is then they're immediately going to start licking themselves, right? So that's the groom, and then they're going to sleep. We do that. Ideally, we do that twice a day with every single cat that's in our care. So there's programs that we also have, like if you haven't heard of the Jackson Galaxy Cat Positive training through Greater Good, I would definitely look into that. It is a program of using clicker training specifically for cats, and that was a game changer for us to get cats out of the litter box lounge. So cats that are really stressed, that are just hanging out in their litter box, how do we get them to come up to the front of the kennel bars and start to engage with us? How do we desensitize to touch, that sort of stuff? We use clicker training for all of that, and that was hugely beneficial. So definitely look at the cat positive training, and he's revamped it. I actually saw him. I happened to be at Casey Pet Project today that he was there, and we talked about his revamp of what he was doing. There's a second part of the training which actually is starting to do like behavior modification for some of the fractious cats that we potentially can't place for whatever reason. If we have ordinance things that we can't return them and that sort of stuff, or we could typically do like a shelter neuter return program. If we're unable to do that, it gives us an outlet of like, how can we start to modify this cat's behavior? And so he had a secondary training on that. So that's a really good program to look at for doing cat behavior and doing cat enrichment. So documenting the behavior. This is huge. This is the linchpin of any program that you implement, enrichment or behavior. So if a dog is limping in your shelter, how many people know about it? In mine, everybody did, right? Back right leg, the dog is limping. Then the front desk knows, the ED knows, the medical team knows, all of the care people know, everybody knows that a dog is limping. But if a dog starts to spin in its kennel, how many people know? Right? So we need to start treating those escalations of behavior as if, to me, a spinning dog is far worse. That's like a broken leg. That's not a sprained leg or a limping leg. That is a red flag. The dog is screaming from a bullhorn to us that we are not meeting its needs. So we need to start treating behaviors in the exact same way that we treat medical issues. We need to understand that we are documenting factual observations at the time of the event. We need to replace subjective descriptions with objective ones. So instead of saying that a dog is showing signs of aggression, what does that mean? Then what we need to say is, as I approached, the dog's stance stiffened, showed piloerection. You can say the hackles came up, whichever, bared teeth, and gave a low growl. That tells anybody who has any kind of behavior background or training of what happened in that event. If you say the dog showed aggression, we all have, when I say aggression, every single one of you has a specific thing in your mind that is happening when I say aggression. Aggression is a 4-letter word, and you need to put a swear jar out, and every time you hear it, they got to put money in it. We need to take that word out of the vocabulary. We need to use objective language of what is actually happening. So you do the exact same thing if, when you're writing up your report. So if we get a dog into the shelter that's emaciated, and there may be a case here for animal cruelty, we need to document everything, just like what we would do for a neglect case, right? We wouldn't say like, oh, the owner starved the dog. No, what we're going to say is based on the Purina body condition score, it had a body condition score of 1, that you could visibly see the hip bones, the vertebrae were prominent, it had no discernible body fat and obvious loss of muscle, right? That paints the picture of what is happening. We need to get to that point with documenting our behaviors and recognizing when those behaviors are changing, right? So we want to be specific about what behaviors they're exhibiting. So what is the body language indicators telling us? Avoid pass fail, such as, like food aggressive, like that dog's food aggressive. There's scales of food aggression. Whenever somebody says food aggression, I have a specific memory of the worst food aggression case that I have ever seen in a shelter. And I brought in an external trainer that could only get maybe 15 feet away when there was food in front of a dog. And this was a big dog. It was a Akita. So imagine, I'm sure you guys have memories like right now when I say Akita with food aggression, think of whatever that was times 10, because it was that bad. So instead of saying like that dog has food aggression, because whenever I hear somebody say that dog has food aggression, that's the memory that pops into my head. But if you said, when presented with food, the dog's eyes dilated, the ears went back, the head lower, and the dog gave a low growl, I'm like, oh, that's not that bad. That is not the Akita wanting to rip your face off 10 feet away, right? That's not that. So we need to start using the language that trainers use. So if we start to network these dogs, or we're trying to find placement with transport partners, if we're talking with trainers, we can present them with information that they will understand, and they will know exactly what needs to be done if we start using these terms. So our notes need to be very detailed in what the body language is exhibiting. So when I said that, this takes a little bit extra training, we all need to be trained in what body language we're talking about. So here's a video that I found a couple years ago when it was still Twitter. I'm going to play it several times. Initially, I'll just play it first so you guys get to see this, because this is super fun. Right? Perfect example of barrier reactivity, right? But now I want you to watch the big dog, not the corgi. There's a whole basically page of this corgi just doing this. Like I saw there was one where he was basically attacking through the glass, but there was no door. The dog went in, drank water, came back out, and started doing this again. Apparently this is his MO. I think he's in Japan based on the writing on the door, or he's somewhere. So watch the bigger dog, and I want you to look at the body language. So what I see is fear, right? This dog, the bigger dog, I'm going to play it again. I'll try to talk over it if you can hear me. So watch what he does, right? When the door goes open, he averts the eyes away. He moves away. The tail actually tucked. When the dog actually came by and was like, we're cool, I was able to sniff the butt and the tail came to a more relaxed position, but he's still averting his eyes, right? So this is when we start talking about like fear aggression and things like that. It was like, I love that, because if we remove the fear of this dog, then we remove any kind of response that he's giving from it, right? So this is one thing that it's a good example of, if we're making determinations of this is what we're seeing through the kennel door, how do we know it's actually true unless we put dogs together? And again, bullhorn, playgroup. This is where playgroup comes in. So this is, if we're worried about aggression, we cannot actually say these two dogs are not going to get along unless we put them together. Now there's safety tools that we go about that, and there's processes that we go about that, and how we introduce dogs and things like that. And I got videos for that too. So this is this video shows the power of playgroup. Now it's a little bit long, but ultimately a half-hour playgroup is the equivalent of a 2-hour walk. It gives the mental stimulation. It checks the enrichment box. It can also be used as a behavior modification tool. So playgroup does require additional training. So you're going to probably have to send somebody to, a Dogs Playing for Life mentorship, go to one of their trainings, that type of stuff. There are, different options out there. If you don't like the way Dogs Playing for Life does it, there's the other group, the Shelter Pet Alliance or whatever it is, that does their version of playgroup. It doesn't matter. Just do whatever you feel most comfortable with. But behaviors such as like reactivity, dog-to-dog reactivity, fear aggression, that type of stuff, all of that stuff can be resolved in playgroup. And we can use it as a behavior modification tool to start to desensitize dogs that, if we get this on a regular basis. Dogs came in, they were adopted out, they either were taken away from their litter mates too soon, they don't know how to behave like a dog, they don't know how to play like a dog. I can't teach a dog how to play, only another dog can teach a dog how to play, and the only way to teach a dog how to play is to put it in with dogs playing. So that's the point. This guy happens to be, his name is Tony. You'll see that he has on-leash reactivity and barrier reactivity. And with that, I will let Tony show you the power of playgroup. This is at Austin Pets Alive, by the way.
Had to have it like 3 times I've been moving. Alright, I'm gonna heal here. Actually, last I gotta go. Alright, bring it.
So there's a couple things I want to point out. Like, he was on a basket muzzle, so safety tool. He's also on a drag leash, so they have a handle in case things go awry. He was licking his, I don't know if you guys saw that, but he was licking his lips within the muzzle. So it was definitely a lot of fear around these other dogs. This is Mike Caviani, was running this group. He saw the same thing that I saw, basically, with like the tail wags and that sort of stuff. And he removed the muzzle. He was like, this dog is not actively going and muzzle punching other dogs, is not trying to attack other dogs. And he does that for a period of time, to the point where he's like, okay, the muzzle can come off. And now Tony is actually playing with another dog. You also saw him do a shake. When the muzzle came off, he shook it off. That's what we're looking at, is usually if we see kind of some stress, they will shake to shake it off. And now look at that, he's on his back. So if we're making determinations that like Tony's aggressive. Tony can't be with other dogs. Tony is all of these things because these are what we're seeing on leash reactivity. If he sees another dog when he's on leash, he's going to lunge over and wants to attack the dog. The best scene on that was when they first put the muzzle on, he runs over the fence and he punches it with the muzzle. That was great because he knows that he's perfectly safe in that. He knows he's safe on leash. He's just trying to tell somebody, hey, come at me, bro. It's like your buddy's holding you back, then they let go and you're like, uh-oh, now I either need to fight or I just need to be like, sorry. In Tony's case, it's sorry. Like, I really didn't mean it. He came in, he was all stiff, bristled, like his tail was stiff, and he was just like bopping around like, what's happening right now? These dogs are just like, what's going on, man? Like, you're cool. Come over, sniff, 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 do all the stuff. And now Tony is a playgroup rock star, right? So it shows the power of playgroup of actually safely introducing these dogs into groups of dogs to truly see what their behaviors are. So if we're doing formal assessments and things like that, and what we have seen so far, and we label this dog as a specific thing, we don't actually know until we actually put him with other dogs. But that's also why you also see Mike has his pet correctors and his shake hands. So like, we have safety tools that we have that if things start to go awry, we can go in, and we're looking for things like uninterruptible drive and things like redirection and conflict driven dogs that if a fight breaks out, the other dogs join in because they're like, sweet, I love fighting. Like, these are all things that we can learn that we just can't with formal assessments. So big Kool-Aid drinker of playgroups. So again, this comes from the Dogs Playing for Life survey. So 100% of the respondents say that the benefits outweigh the risk. For large dogs, the average length of stay decreased by 2 weeks, a total of 12 days. It helped make the better adoption matches. That was 98% of the respondents said that. 98% of respondents said that allowed staff to better assess dog-to-dog concerns. 96% was supplied useful information about dogs beyond their dog-to-dog sociability, afforded shelters time to provide additional enrichment to the dogs because you're taking groups of dogs out all at once, 20 to 30 at a time in some cases. Sometimes in your shelter, it may just be 10 dogs, but 10 dogs out all at once for 30 minutes. Guess what? You didn't have to walk individually those 10 dogs for 30 minutes, right? So now we got all of that stuff done. Now all of that time that would have been spent doing hand walks can now be spent doing other things like enrichment. So now we can take these individual dogs out that need a little bit extra, and then we can do a little bit more with them, right? So average canine live release increased by 3.3%. Average canine length of stay decreased by 8.5%. So that was average. So large dogs, it decreased by 12 days. Average dogs decreased by 8.5. So that's the big one. Some things that you can do that really doesn't cost any money. Click to Quiet, I talked about, is a place to start. It can be accomplished by volunteers if they're walking through kennels. It can be done by staff that when they have a free minute. The door routine, which is the second video that I'll show, is a simple way of introducing that obedience behavior into every aspect of what we do in the shelter. We have to take animals out of their kennel. We might as well add some training to it so that we start laying the foundation for all of this stuff. There's Dogs Playing for Life also has kind of we think of them as the play group, but they also have their fancy footwork program, which is a way of adding obedience to simple leash walks and things like that. So I'll go through. This is also from Austin Pets Alive. This is how they do their Click to Quiet.
Good. We're working on Click for Quiet. This is a clicker. It's a very distinct noise that cuts through the chaos of the shelter. What we're doing is rewarding for calm and quiet behavior in the kennel. So we want 4 on the floor, no barking. Then we're going to give them a treat. So we click, treat. Some dogs don't like fingers in the kennel, so we also are okay with you tossing a treat in the kennel. That way no accidents happen. Sometimes the dog is quiet, like Lucky here, but he's also standing on the gate. So we want all 4 on the floor. So we can try bending down. It's not helping, so we're going to move to his neighbor and see if we can convince him that it's a good idea to get off his gate.
kennel door routine, this is me doing it. This was the training video that I had for our staff and volunteers at the shelter I
All right,
worked
this
at.
is the kennel door routine. So as you approach the kennel door, you're going to mark and reward for being calm, 4 on the floor. So here, mark and reward, mark and reward. Then what we're going to do is mark, go ahead and enter. Since we went ahead and marked, we need to reward. Then we're going to go ahead and leash the dog up. Once the dog is leashed up, we're going to open up the kennel door about 2 inches. If the dog approaches the kennel door, we're going to go ahead and shut it. And all we're looking for here is basically them deciding not to dart towards the door, like Dodge does right here, and we're just going to go ahead and walk out. You don't need to use the release command. You can just go ahead and walk.
So you can also do that in reverse, that they have to be calm. You can extend this out if they have a Kuranda bed in their kennel, that they have to actually go to place before we can enter. So you can take it and extend kind of that threshold line of what is an acceptable behavior before they leave their kennel. They're going to want to leave their kennels. So this is something, if you have a lot of jumpy, mouthy dogs and things like that, there's things that we can do. It may not be something that we can do right away. We're going to have to do the drive expression work. They're going to have to be calm. They get settled. We go back in and then we start working on this type of stuff. It takes, the first time you do it, it's going to take a little bit of time. The next time is half the amount of time. The next time is half the amount of time, to where then all of the dogs just understand that this is what we do. So you can assign dogs to specific handlers to do that, and then rotate so that they're not just getting used to one handler. We want to basically make it so that they listen to humans and not specifically one person.
All right.
There is that. So another one for me, eye contact, #1 rewardable behavior.
All right, so we're gonna start trying to play
Made You Look
here
is the
with
game.
Amy and Heidi. So Amy's got some food in each of her hands.
So no clickers,
And
because we have some
Heidi's
in each hand.
interested in the food. She's adorably pawing at the hands, licking, sniffing. Amy's not saying anything, right? She's not helping her out. She's not giving her any hints. Nice. I don't know if you could pick up on that, but Heidi glanced up at Amy's face, and that's when Amy opened up one of her hands. So we're showing Heidi, nope, that wasn't it. That wasn't it. Licking didn't work. Nuzzling didn't work. Pawing didn't work. None of that is how you open up these hands that have treats in them. There's only one way to get that to happen. Nice. And that's looking at Amy's face.
That's it. So that's not the only thing it costs us is a little bit of time. And that's where volunteers can do this. When they can take when they're going out on the walk, they do the kennel door routine. They can do click to quiet before they even do the kennel door routine. Take the dog out. We go for a walk. We do some basic obedience. We do some threshold training. They look at us. We can work on Made You Look while they're on the walk. We can enrich the walk. They come back in. They do all the stuff. We're just adding all of these things to things we're already doing. And it doesn't cost us a dime. It doesn't cost us any time whatsoever.
All right.
So kind of key takeaways. This is all based on the resources that you may just need a robust enrichment program, which I think the majority of you probably do. Do we need to hire a behaviorist to come in and fix this? No. Our focus is low length of stay, getting animals out, making sure they don't come in the first place. So intake diversion, pet retention, doing those types of programs, removing any barriers to adoption, all of the normal stuff that we do. But we know that they are staying longer. The national average is length of stay is ticking upwards, right? And people are more interested, and it seems to be like in cats now, than they are big dogs. So we need to start thinking outside the box on how to get animals out. But based on the amount of resources, make a enrichment program that fits the needs of your shelter. I have given you a tremendous amount of information here. Pick and choose what you think would fit, things like that. So enrichment programs use all of the senses. Don't just focus on taste. The peanut butter Kong is not good enough for an enrichment program. Cats are in fact not small dogs, and we need to enrich them in the same way that we do dogs. We just have to think differently on what their needs are. And more importantly, playgroup is worth the investment. Adding behavioral elements to everything that you do is a good place to start. Having everybody wear treat pouches and have clickers is a good place to start, and show everybody that this in fact is very important to us, and it needs to come top down. So If the executive director or shelter manager doesn't have a treat pouch on them, then why would anybody else, right? So it has to come from the top, and it has to be like, this is the direction that we're moving. We need to start focusing on the psychology and the well-being, the mental well-being of the animals that are in our care. So with that, there's my email. You can feel free to shoot me a message. If you have any questions, anything like that, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have. I know we're kind of getting near the top of the hour, so if you got a jet, I understand that too, but I'll stick around to answer any questions.
Awesome. Tim, thank you so much for the great information. I've been monitoring the chat. I've got one question from Geraldine. She says, are there any groups that you would recommend to join as an ongoing discussion or information on these topics?
So if you do happen to go to any of the Dogs Playing for Life, like mentorships, there is a Facebook group specifically for those people. And so you can actually continue like conversations with other shelters and things like that. As far as like actual like forums and things like that, I don't know of any where it's just, I mean, you can always do like the Maddie's Pet Forum. If you're a network partner or best friends, we do have our Facebook group that you can always throw stuff out there and have conversations. The Maddie's Pet Forum is a very good one that you can throw information out there, and conversations are always being had on what people are doing for enrichment and behavior. You can always search it and find out like what have people said in the last 2 years about these topics and things like that. So that's the one place I would definitely start.
Okay. And then what about common behavior problems? What do you think, in your opinion, is the more common behavior issues you see people relinquishing animals for, or having complaints or struggles with?
A lot of it right now, from what we're tracing it back to, is housing issues. So we're seeing a tremendous amount more of evictions. And there is, of course, the insurance companies and things like that that have restrictions on rental properties. So if somebody is owning their home and now they have to rent, they can no longer have a dog that's over 35 pounds, right? So what we're seeing, at least on the what we're getting on the data side nationally, we're seeing a lot of relinquishments because of housing issues. And that is tracked. We're overlaying that with also the social vulnerability index, and we're starting to see correlations. So we're starting to track, like, especially if we hear in a city, oh, we're getting a lot more housing related surrenders. Okay, we can also track how many evictions were there. And those are lining up. So as we're seeing a spike in evictions, we're also seeing a spike in intake and things like that. So there's, unfortunately, for those kinds of situations, it's not great. If we're talking temporary housing, if we're doing that sort of stuff, having emergency housing programs helps. If somebody finds themselves being, homeless or houseless, whatever the term is that we're using now, is like, can we temporarily take on this animal, put it in foster until they can find permanent placement? We generally have that with domestic violence centers and things like that. Can we expand that out to people that are having some housing issues? Because at the end of the day, they have a family. We don't want to break up the family. We want to reunite the family. And what program is that going to look like to make sure that we can reunite the family? If they do have to move and they're going to have to be in an apartment and they can't take the dog, I mean, unfortunately, that kind of falls to us. And then now we have a situation where we have to rehome a dog that's never been in a shelter before. Stress is going to be the biggest concern.
Okay. And then one more question. When it comes to, you talk about social enrichment and things like that, when it comes to like daycares and boarding and grooming and things like that, because the animal is shifting to a new environment, is that enrichment enough? Do you think enrichment is important when it comes to those larger playgroup areas, like you said? And
yeah, if we're doing like daycare and things like that, that's great. Typically what I see in the shelters is a lot of our dogs they would be kicked out of daycare, right? They generally have no social skills whatsoever. They don't know when to stop. They don't know, like, I had a German Shepherd that would bite dogs on the butt really hard to get them to yelp because he wanted them to engage in play. He didn't understand that that was an appropriate behavior, and it took a special environment with a special groups of dogs that helped teach him that that wasn't the case. One, he was on a basket muzzle, so he can't bite a dog on the butt, we're not talking about breaking skin, but it was like he wanted to be chased. And so he was, instead of like, hey, chase me, it was chomp. And then they would turn around and being like, what did you do? Fight breaks out. And he's like, oh, we're fighting now? Okay, cool. And that's cool. That's not, they would be kicked out of daycare, right? So if you can utilize some of those businesses, it's great. But it takes special training for us to be like, we have to be able to teach these dogs manners. And once they know manners, then we can utilize those services. So if you have a business, it'd be like, yeah, I have a light day. If you want to bring over 3 dogs for an 8-hour daycare session, take it. Be like, yes, those dogs are going to be so exhausted at the end of the day. They're going to be so happy. They're going to sleep through the night like a baby, right? Definitely do that. Any of us that have put dogs into daycare know how effective they are. It like exhausting your dog, right? But we can do that at the shelter too. Like we have the ability to exhaust them on our own. We just have to learn how to do it. And honestly, like the majority of the dogs that we get, they don't know how to play. They just don't. They've been isolated for their entire lives. They probably have never seen another dog. And now they're in this stressful environment. They don't know what's happening. And now there's dogs in their face and they're just lashing out and like biting the air. That's a good rehab opportunity that Playgroup can do. I've seen some amazing things where dogs are just completely shut down, shy, fearful, shaking in the corner. We do that for like 10 minutes. They go away. The next time they do it, they're like kind of watching. And then we pull them. The next day, they're actually like, like full blown watching, and then throw a play bow and take off running. Like I've seen stuff like that. I've seen like full 180s on dogs. I've also seen dogs just have a weird snap that they were completely fine, and then all of a sudden something snaps in their head, and they just start attacking every single dog in the play yard. I don't know what happens. Like there's different triggers and stuff, but you get to see so much more, and then you also get to see when we're doing Playgroup, like it's an assessment tool. It tells us the social ability of the animal, tells us how well they walk on a leash, because we have to leash walk them to the play yards. It tells them if they just hide behind humans and they're terrified of other dogs. That tells us a tremendous amount of information on if we're going to do any kind of desensitization training with around other dogs. We get to see also like, oh, these dogs, when they're out of Playgroup, they're still have high energy. So now we start to see like, okay, this isn't enough. So when I talked about when we're doing like thinking about it like medical treatment, we can prescribe treatment protocols for behavior. We can RX a, flirt pole. We can do more drive expression or scent work. Like we can prescribe different behavior aspects to see if we can't alleviate whatever frustration that dog has. And that's what we need to start thinking about, is think about it more like a doctor thinks about a medical case. We can do the same differential. So dog comes in lethargic with a fever and it stopped eating. Okay, well, these are all of the things that could do. So we run blood work, we run all those things, and we start crossing things off the list. That's how a doctor determines what they think the disease is, and they create a treatment protocol to fix the disease. We need to do the exact same thing on the behavior side. We're the psychiatrists, the veterinarians are the doctors, right? We need to start thinking about the mental well-being of the animals, and we really start to need to see like all of the stuffs. Look at the body language, look at the spinning, the barking, the lunging. I assessed a dog yesterday and my arms are all bruised because the dog had been there for 4 months, and he basically is now to the point where he just gets overstimulated and he starts redirecting onto the handlers and things like that. So they asked me to assess him basically to help them with a euthanasia call, and he's not there yet. Like I couldn't even redline him when I got him out to see if I can't downshift him and do all that sort of stuff. But these are all things that you can do. He's good in Playgroup up to a point where he then starts to get overstimulated and he can't calm himself down. So I'm giving him some resources to try to teach the dog to self-calm himself. Still use Playgroup, still use these other things, but see if we can get a little bit of bite inhibition in there, and then give him a little bit of drive work so he can actually express that. If he does feel the need that he wants to bite something, we can give him an appropriate time and place to do that. And then we start to alleviate that frustration, and he starts to calm down, where we're not getting just the shit beat out of us. Like, because you should see my arms, like they're bruised. like it was a lot, but he wasn't there for me. So we can still do some work.
Okay, well, Tim, thank you so much for your time and expertise this afternoon. We're gonna be posting this online if anybody needs to watch it again. And Tim gave out his email and information, so our next webinar is gonna be on April 24th at noon. So you guys look out for your email around mid-April for that webinar information. And everybody have a great afternoon. Thanks for participating.
See you, everybody.